Hi, my name is Julia Sudermans, and I will be doing my culminating presentation for Challenge and Change on teens and their perception on mental health. So it is no mystery that teenage years can be an emotional roller coaster between growing up and changes to your body, and then you have more responsibility from school, you get a job, and society's telling you that you have to start being an active and participating citizen. So, and then on top of that, you are trying to figure out who you are and how you fit into this world. So, given that, it's no surprise that teens can struggle with their mental health. So in any given year, 1 in 5 Canadians can experience mental health problems or have a mental illness. And if you don't have experience with a mental health problem or illness, you probably know either a family member, a best friend, or a colleague who does. And if you still don't think that you know anyone close to you, well, chances are you probably do. They may just not have been wanting to share that information with you. So it is really prevalent in our society, and especially in teenagers. So 10 to 20% of Canadian youth today suffer from mental health issues, and suicide is the second leading cause to youth deaths, and that's right behind accidents. So it is a fairly big issue in teens. And because of that, I wanted to learn more about how teens view their mental health and how their perception is on getting treatment like counseling. So drawing from my experiences and also perceiving my friends and my peers, I hypothesize that not every teen who is going through mental health problems will want to seek counseling or get treatment that they need. And I think that is because there is a negative stigma on mental health, because some people think that it isn't legit enough to get professional help, and that they can just cure it on their own, or they're ashamed to talk about it because people will think that they're crazy. And I know some people, for example, think that if you are just feeling sad that you can just snap out of it and just decide to be happy, which isn't always the case. So initially, to kind of develop my hypothesis, I researched some other sources who have touched on the subject. So I did find this article online, and it evaluated a lot of different surveys that researched teens and how they seek mental health, counseling, and rehabilitation. So what they did was they kind of organized all of the results and evaluated them and put it into a chart here. So in this report, the biggest number of studies that said that public and self-stigmatized attitudes on mental health was the biggest barrier for teens receiving mental health counseling, which also goes with my hypothesis that there is a negative stigma. And then I found interesting was the second biggest barrier was confidentiality and trust, which does also tie to mental health stigma, because if people are ashamed about it and they think that having mental illness is bad, they're gonna be kind of worried about who they tell, and they don't want to confess their problems to a counselor. So yeah, it was a really good resource. It was very very professional article. It was done by university, and I couldn't perceive any bias in it. It just took the data from the other reports and research and just organized it and did a thorough job of making sure it fit the criteria. So I think this is a really good resource to use. And then a second resource I looked on was an article online about the media's damaging impact on public perception of electroconvulsive therapy. And if you don't know what electroconvulsive therapy is, it's when electrodes are attached to the head and electrical pulses go through the brain and they cause mild seizures. And that can cause the rerouting and reorganization of neural pathways, which in some cases can cure severe depression or other mental illnesses. So this was a very emotionally charged article. The author uses some very emotional words. For example, it is a disservice to a vulnerable group of patients who could benefit from ETC. So obviously this author is very emotionally invested in this topic, and it's because he is an active psychiatrist and does practice electroconvulsive therapy. I do agree with his opinion that the media does have a negative impact on this type of therapy. For example, the movie called The One Who Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest, it shows like a very bad example of a psychiatric ward, and it just shows like a negative impact because none of the patients like being there, and the nurses mistreat the patients, which is obviously not the case in an actual mental hospital. So the media, for example, does give a bad perception, but what the author fails to address is the fact that people are not willing to receive any kind of treatment, including stuff like therapy or prescription drugs, which is pretty basic. So it's not just electroconvulsive therapy, I think it's therapy in general. So after looking at all the sources, I decided to see if the same views were reflected in my peers at my school. So what I did is I made up a survey, and I surveyed 100 kids from my school, and I administrated the survey to one class in each grade, so one class in grade 9 through 12, just so I can get an even demographic of all of the age groups and make it fairly even and honest. And I also set up an online survey for volunteers who wanted to fill it out. So here are the results. So the first thing I asked was kind of a fairly general question. Do you consider mental illness a valid condition, and do you think that mental health is important? And I was very pleased to see that majority of the people answered yes, only a few did answer no, which means that kids now do know how important mental health is, and they do take it seriously, which is nice to see. So then, out of the 100 people I surveyed, there was only, I believe, 36 people who said that they had a mental illness, which means that 1 in 3 people in my sample had a mental illness, which is kind of a big fraction if you think about it. So it's good that we know that. And then out of those who have had a mental illness or mental health problems, only about half, half of them did not get treatment. So it's a pretty bad statistic if you think about it, because if you have a problem, you should be getting help, but the majority have not gotten counseling or any treatment for their mental illness, which should be the other way around. And then those who have gotten counseling, the majority did say that it was effective. So we do know that counseling did, for a majority, prove effective. So then I asked, okay, out of you that do experience mental health problems but did not receive any treatment, what were your reasons? Because I wanted to know, well, why do they avoid getting help if they need it? And majority of those surveyed answered that they did not think that they needed counseling. And then the second highest would be worries how others would view them, which does align with my hypothesis that there's a negative stigma, because people are worried that they might be looked down because they have a mental illness, which adds to the stigma. And the average time it took a teen to receive counseling before they suspected that there was a problem was 1.53 years, which is a long time if you have something wrong with you. Like if you had a flu or a sickness, you wouldn't wait a year before you go to the doctor, you would go straight away. So the fact that it's so much different for mental health is in fact really sad. And then the last question was, do you think that counseling is necessary to improve mental health? And majority did say yes. So although people don't want to go to counseling, they acknowledge the fact that it does work for the most time. So then I wanted to know why. So I asked a counselor about her opinions, and because she deals with teens one-on-one with counseling, and she said that she agrees that there's a negative stigma on mental health because it's harder to perceive, whereas physical illness is easier to perceive because it's on the body. And then I also asked her if everyone who is having mental health problems should receive counseling, and she said it depends on the person. Like majority do find counseling effective, but there are also people who deal with it in different ways, like artistic expression. So it depends, which does align with the other question, do you think counseling is effective? Because maybe the people who answered no are the people who prefer to express or deal with their mental health problems in a different way and express that. And then I asked her, because I had already collected all the surveys at that point, I asked her why she thought that people who have mental health, and then I asked the counselor why she thought that people who have struggles have not sought therapy and they didn't know that they needed it. And she said people may think that counseling is not an option, or they might have grown up in an environment where others have had a mental illness but it hasn't been addressed, so they think that behavior is normal. Therefore they don't know the signs and symptoms that anything is wrong, so that's why. And they also think, and then another reason could be, like I said, people don't think that counseling is the best option for them. So, as you can see, if my hypothesis is correct, that that teens think that there is a negative stigma around counseling, therefore teens are afraid to seek help. And I also noticed that teens fail to successfully self-assess their mental health and whether they need help with it or not. And I think the easiest solution is education. We can use this data to bring it to schools to show that there is a dire need of a more in-depth education on mental health and how to recognize the signs and symptoms and where to go to get treatments. And if we can increase education on mental health, then imagine how many lives we can save or improve for the better. So it is really important to teach teens healthy ways to resolve their mental health problems, because if we don't do it now, they'll grow up into adults who still have these problems, and they can become problematic. For example, 2 out of 3 homeless people using urban shelters suffer from some form of mental health illness, and people who suffer with mental health illnesses are at significantly higher risk of unemployment. So if we can resolve those issues at a younger age, then those people can grow up into healthy, functioning adults who can contribute to the economy, and that makes for a happier population and a more stable, prospering economic world for Canada. So, in conclusion, teens already have to suffer enough, or teens already have to go through enough on their own, so don't let them go through mental illness by themselves. And to leave you with a thought, if you would go to the doctor when you have the flu, why won't you when you have a mental illness? Thank you.
Whoa.